Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Jiayu. I'm a final year PhD student, and I'm supervised by Professor Maria. And today I will present the timeline summarization and improving the temporal reasoning with LLMs. Given a timeline, we'd like to provide concise summaries that can capture fluctuations in individuals' state of mind. While at first seizing the key clinical concepts, which can significantly assist in monitoring prevention and early detection of mental health issues. And we have been working with psychologists to identify the kind of aspects that would be useful to include in the concise mental health summary. This includes the core diagnostic about the mental state and interpersonal patterns and signs of changes. As we don't have the ground truth summary, so we require unsupervised method. So our objectives here is, the first is we'd like to develop and supervise a timeline summarization method that can capture important information from the social media. And the second is to provide a method for translating the timeline summaries to a clinically meaningful format. And the third is to develop evaluation strategy for assessing these types of a summary. And our solutions for objectives 1 and 2, we will create two layered summaries. The first is the first person summary. This is a timeline summary. We like to extract the key important information from the timeline. And the second is a high-level summary. This summary is from the perspective of a clinician, which translates the first person into the third person. It covers clinical meaningful concepts. Then we obtain the high-level summary based on the LLM. We will feed the timeline summary into the LLM to generate the high-level summary with the instruction prompts in a map-reduced fashion. We designed a method to generate the timeline summary inspired by the work in computer vision, which captures the different aspects of image using the hierarchical VE. Then we will use develop a timeline hierarchical VE to capture the different aspects of the timeline. In this learning process, we will split a timeline into different segments. In these segments, it contains the consecutive posts belonging to the same mode phase. And then we will train the hierarchical VE by input the segment and we learn the segment distribution by reconstruct this segment. During the generate the timeline summary, we will treat the segment as a unit. And in order to capture the key information from the timeline, we will use an automatic method based on the LLM to extract the clinical mental health related information from the timeline to get key phrases. And then we will encode the key phrases and the segment pairs using the attention mechanism to get the segment representation. Then we concatenate the segment representations of a timeline in a chronological order and input the hierarchical VE to generate the timeline summary. And here is an example of this is a gold summary, and this is a summary generated by the hierarchical VE. And from the moment of change, we can see that there's some the wrong information here. Based on the text provided, individual experience significant fluctuations with periods of relative stability and hope interspersed with episodes of depression, anxiety, and suicide thoughts. But the human rating summary here said there's no sign of improvements in their mental health. So I think there must be some, the model cannot understand some the temporal relationship between these events, so we give the wrong information here. So what I think that why not use the temporal reasoning to improve the timeline summarization task. We hope that we can use the temporal reasoning to improve the timeline summarization. This can help the model to understand and process temporal information in text to deduce the time-based relationships between events. So here's our proposed model. The first step, we will fine-tuning teacher model to get the temporal reasoning ability. And the second step, we will phrase the teacher model, and then we will transfer the temporal reasoning ability to the student model. And at the same time, the student model will use the temporal reasoning knowledge to improve the timeline summarization task. Now I will introduce how do we fine-tune the teacher language model. The first step, we will reconstruct the narrative reason dataset. Why do we want to reconstruct this dataset? Because now current of work which fine-tune the LLM to get the temporal reasoning ability, they will use the dataset. Most of the dataset has have the pairs of events instead of multiple events. This will cause the LLM will memorize the most frequent answer rather than to develop the temporal reasoning. If we process a sequence of events, it requires the model a more intricate reasoning, including recognizing patterns, dependence, and causal chains among multiple events. And so this is this is useful for the complex tasks such as narrative comprehension and timeline summarization. So we will create the dataset based on the narrative time dataset. In this dataset, it has annotated all of the temporal relationships between the events in this story, and they have already annotated the verb to represent an event right here. But you can see that in this dataset, this format, it cannot be used for the temporal reasoning training. So we reconstructed it. We use the verbs as the triggers to extract the relational triples. Like here, we extract tuning, and we extract the triples like this: financial weak, training bad for Asia. And then we will use the question answering prompts to reconstruct the dataset. And in this dataset, it has 4 temporal relationship: before, after, during, and simultaneous. Then we will use supervised fine-tuning method to fine-tune the larger language model, which is a teacher model using LoRa. And then we input the model, the temporal question, and the output the corresponding answer. Then this is knowledge distillation. During the knowledge distillation process, we use 3 different methods. And for more details, you can check our paper here. And during this process, as I mentioned before, we will use temporal reasoning ability to improve the timeline summarization task. But here, the timeline summarization task we use is from the news dataset. And then we apply our model to a totally different domains, the mental health, to generate the mental health summary. You can see we use the factual consistency and the evidence appropriateness to evaluate our summary. Now you can see that the knowledge distillation method has the best performance. And we also make an ablation experiment that we only tune the file with only just one dataset, that we fine-tuning file with the temporal reasoning dataset, and we fine-tune it with the timeline summarization dataset. And you can see that just a fine-tuning on a single dataset cannot improve the model performance. And we also do the human evaluation. And you can see that if we use a larger model as a teacher model, it can help the student model to acquire more comprehensive information. And this is examples of the generated summaries. This is a summary generated by Llama, and this is summary generated by Phi, we can see that there's some hallucination information here and the wrong information. And this is knowledge distillation method. Generates the summary. We can see that it can reduce the hallucination and can reduce output of incorrect method, incorrect information. And then we can go back. We can compare the summaries generated by THVE here, and we can see that the method, the summary generated by the knowledge distillation method, we can see that the overall mode and the mode of change, the individuals remains consistently low throughout the timeline with no clear evidence of any significant positive changes. So we can see that it can learn the temporal relationships between these different events. This then we also analyze why knowledge distillation works, and we analyze the internal representation of the larger of the knowledge distillation and the joint learning. This is a representation of the knowledge distillation. We can see it can separate the temporal reasoning task and the timeline summarization task clearly. But for the knowledge distillation method, there's some overlap between the knowledge distillation and the timeline summarization. This is due to that knowledge distillation have a more task-specific polysymmetric neurons. So then we use the CK to a similarity score to measure the similarity between the internal representation models. And we can see that the blue line is the knowledge distillation line. This indicates that the knowledge distillation preserves and refines information from the initial embeddings in a task-relative way. And this is due to the knowledge distillation encourage the alignment by transferring the task relevant knowledge from the teacher model. But we can see here, this is a joint learning. It shows a failure to refine representation effectively in deeper layers due to, I think this is because of the conflicting objectives between these two tasks. And this is our conclusion. We develop a narrative reason dataset which contains relation triples to represent the event sequences within a narrative. And then we use the knowledge distillation method to fine-tune the LLMs to improve the timeline summarization task. And third, we apply the model to a different domain, the one we train on. And the third one, the last one, our results demonstrate that the knowledge distillation method produces more accurate summaries. That's all. Thank you. Yes, is there any questions? Yes.
Fantastic work. Fantastic work. Congratulations. It sounds really helpful for us clinicians, kind of what we're seeing patients trying to write notes. I'm just wondering, like apart from, I understand that you assessed the fit of the summaries based on how well they represent the source material. But sometimes, I guess, one of the challenges we've got in the clinic is that we have to get the information that we need rather than quite a lot of noise that could be there in terms of other information, which at the time we feel is irrelevant. Could you kind of have summaries of a kind of large source material in a way that is adapted to kind of the needs of a therapist? For example, sometimes when I have to see a patient in acute, I only want information about what is history which is relevant to what I'm going to do with them in acute. Like, for example, what medication has been taking, what is the history of medication, are there any allergies, so I don't make the wrong choices, and so on. So would it be possible to use these approaches in a way that not only summarizes well the source material, but also kind of identify things that are particularly relevant for particular needs? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, I think it works because you can see for our this first, yes, this method, because from the social media timeline, we can get a lot of information from there. But here, we just want to get some information about the mental state changes, mental health. We want to detect the mental health issues of the individuals. So that's we extract the important information from the timeline that's related to their mental health state. So based on your requirement, you can extract the information you like from the timeline and to generate the summary you like using this method.
So you could talk a bit about the key phrases, because I think that's.
Yes, for the key phrases here, because we like to introduce some information about the mental health states, so we introduce the notion of the key phrases here. We using based on the concepts design here, we can extract some key phrases from the timeline using the large language model. We can ask the LLM to extract the information we like, and then after we get the key phrases, we will using the attention mechanism to encode the segment and the corresponding key phrases to get the key information here. And then we concatenate this key information together to generate the summary. And then we can get the summary we'd like. And yeah.
Like what you go into the key phrases, which actually constrain generation.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much. So I was just interested, you do reduce the hallucinations, as you mentioned, in this approach. Is there a trade-off that you're having there in terms of the outcome, that you do reduce hallucinations, but are you missing something in the process of reducing the hallucinations in terms of the outcome? Like you mentioned that one of the outcomes of this is to reduce hallucinations, but is there something else that you're then compromising? Like you gain the decrease in hallucinations, but do you then reduce other aspects?
I didn't hear it clearly. The metrics like evidence appropriate and actual consistency. Yeah. One is looking at how faithful your summary is to the original. And yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about the factual consistency and evidence appropriateness. Those are two metrics that go against each other.
Right.
So, one. Yeah. Yes, because after we generated the summary, we have 30 human written summaries, and then we will use evidence appropriateness to measure the consistency between the human written summaries and the corresponding timeline summaries. And also, we also evaluate the consistency between the timeline information and also the generated summary using the factual consistency. So I can, using these two methods, we can make sure, whether this generated summary can reduce the hallucination.
But also that it stays true to the original timeline as well, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of this is the point of having these two different metrics.
Yes.
Jenny will say more about this because Jenny's work has focused a lot on the evaluation. Yeah, I think maybe we can. Are there more questions? Oh, yes. So, okay, good. Thank you. Kevin and then the person in the chat.
Hi, I'm just interested if you evaluated the quality of the human written summaries, because one of the problems with humans is we're biased and we have cognitive biases. Did you do any evaluation in terms of ground truthing your generated summaries versus those human summaries, or did you just accept the human summaries as your ground truth?
The ground truth summary is written by the psychologist. Yeah, written by the psychologist. And we do the human evaluation by the psychologist too. So yeah.
We had 3 different psychologists working, and so we had some kind of alignment between them, and then each of them was generated. So there's some overlap on sort of which summaries they all create, and then there's also some that are just individually created. So can the person in the chat unmute themselves and ask their question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your talk. So my question was more related to the models and the framework. So I've noticed you were using the general llama and Fei. Is that any particular reason, like you do not using some mental health related fine-tuned LM, and or if that's just for the general LM or just like the llama, will that be helpful? Like we provide lots of background information, like some definition related to that diagnosis, like the RAG system. And that's the first question. And the second one was about your data set generation. So you mentioned you designed a way to distillate or to design the temporal reasoning timeline or summarization. Have you ever tried to compare with some something like the reinforcement learning paradigm, like in the DeepSeek model, like the chain of thoughts? Seems like they are a little bit different with your reasoning template. Thank you. Just like this too.
Yes, for the first question, I want to say that in this task, our aim is to using the temporal reasoning to improve the timeline summarization. It's not just limited to the mental health state domain. So you can see that we use a totally different data from the news domain or the narrative domain to train to fine-tune the large language model, but we generate the mental health summary. It shows that this works for the timeline summarization task. So that's why we didn't use a mental state llama.
But also with the previous paper, mental llama didn't work very well for us, right?
Yes, and for the second question, and we tested that this method we fine tune with this temporal reasoning data set. It can improve the llama, and we have the result in our paper in the appendix, but we didn't compare with yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I see. Because you were mentioned